Look at all of you. All of my brothers and sisters out here. Tashidale, tashidale, tashidale. You know, this is a kind of a strange place to be talking about these things, isn't it? But why not? Right in the middle of the kind of the beating heart of New York, of America, within the kind of entertainment of the world, to be talking about something really important. And not just for Tibetans, for everyone. I'm really, really honored to be here with you tonight. And what this means, I mean, it's honoring this extraordinary man. What he has accomplished here in bringing us together is something truly extraordinary. We're here to honor this man, who I don't remember ever meeting. And probably many of us here didn't meet him, had the privilege, the honor of meeting him, yet whose message now asks something of every one of us, to stand together, this sense of unity, that in unity we can accomplish anything. We know that. Every one of us can stand together for Tibet and be a voice, most importantly, for those inside Tibet. We are there serving them, and I don't think we can ever forget that. This extraordinary man, Labge Ransen, who I don't think anyone's going to forget this name. And for good reason. He's inspired us all. How moved I was and how much he kind of kicked me in the butt. And said, okay, we've been doing kind of extraordinary things. We're doing things in Washington. We're doing things around the world. We talk to our families. We talk to each other. But it's been a lot of talk. This was an extraordinary sacrifice of action that he demonstrated to us. And frankly, I felt woken up by this. Deeply saddened, to be sure. But woken up. But I think we all need to wake up right now. We can wake up. We can change this world. Now, what he spoke about, he believed Tibet's future depends on Tibetans and friends of Tibet and all people of conscience standing together with courage and conviction. He obviously loved Tibet so deeply, he refused to let its suffering remain invisible. He wanted the world to understand that Tibet is not simply occupied. This is a civilization at risk. What is at stake is an entire way of understanding the world and each other. The Tibetan language has its own script and a literary tradition stretching back more than 1,000 years. It contains words for states of mind, levels of consciousness, nature of mind that English cannot even begin to translate at this point. Tanka paintings, wood carvings, monasteries built to mirror the Buddhist understanding of the universe, the workings of the human mind, and humanity's place within that bringing together of compassion and wisdom. And these are not, this is something I go through all the time. They think of, I remember I talked to someone years and years ago about Tibet. And I said, we have to do something. We have to do something. We started Tibet House. We have to do something. And I said, well, maybe you could do something at the Museum of Natural History. And I said, well, that's very nice, but this isn't a dead culture. This is an alive experiment in the possibilities of the human mind and the human heart. These are not relics of the past. They're living traditions that survive only if someone is free to pass them on. And that's why China's very oddly named ethnic unity law, which in fact does just the opposite, presents such an existential risk. It threatens the very conditions that allow Tibetan language culture, and identity to survive. When a civilization loses the freedom to teach its own children, humanity loses something it can never, ever replace. And that is the price of forced assimilation. With every civilization that disappears, we lose a different way of solving problems, of making meaning, of creating beauty, of new ways that we can live together, create a world community which is based on a mutual survival and joy and happiness and love. And it's not only about the rights of Tibetans, obviously, but Uyghurs. We have wonderful Uyghurs here. We have Mongolians, we have Hong Kongers. We're all in this together. And this is about whether we believe every civilization, that means every civilization deserves the right to exist, to endure, and to thrive. His Holiness often says, and very famously so, that his religion is kindness. And we all feel that immediately. But he's not talking about temples or doctrine, but really that warm human heart of kindness. And when you look at the people who learned from him that deep essence of kindness, not the superficial sense, but that deep sense that we're all in this together and we all deserve love and compassion, kindness and joy. When you look at everyone who has learned from him and carried that lesson across the Himalayas into refugee communities, across continents, all the way here to this bizarre place in Times Square right now, you realize that those words were never meant to be just admired. They were meant to be lived deeply inside of us. Because real kindness is not passive. It's not soft. No. Real kindness is standing beside those punished for speaking their language, or speaking their faith, or speaking their truth. Real kindness means refusing to accept that nearly 1 million Tibetan children should be separated from their families and sent to Communist Party boarding schools, where they're made to abandon their language, culture, and history. Real kindness is our refusal to look away when China's injustice to dismantle Tibetans' centuries-old culture and push an entire civilization towards extinction. Our other brother, Martin Luther King Jr., he said that the arc of the moral universe bends always towards justice. And I think that's true. I think we can all believe that. But that bending towards justice only happens because people bend it. It doesn't happen on its own. For more than 70 years, Tibetans have kept bending that arc in exile, in monasteries rebuilt from nothing, in classrooms, at TCVs, in communities around the world, in the halls of the United States Capitol, outside of the UN, and tonight here in Times Square. But a culture can't survive on admiration alone. Those cute Tibetans, it doesn't quite work that way. No. It takes all of us working beside Tibetans to defend their rights, which is we've been doing with the international campaign for Tibet for 35 years now. Tibet can't be forgotten. We must preserve a culture, and it's a responsibility of all of us to do that. So tonight I'm going to ask you to do something. And Tenshala, come up here a second. Here's the president of ICT. And this is one of our programs, but I want you to actually make this appeal. We want you to record a video, okay? Because we're in Congress quite a bit, talking to congressmen and senators, and they're very open to this, believe me. We're very rarely have we been in an office that we feel like we're not welcome or they don't understand the Tibetan situation. But they also want to hear from their constituents. So
we're asking you to record a short video asking your members of Congress